Hello and welcome again. We're having a virtual broadcast of Bridging the Gap in Risk Communication, moving people from awareness to action, presented by Holly and Mark. Holly Harden and Mark Bassnight. Mark is a strategic communications director at Summit ET. Mark's focus is managing strategic communication planning, training, and exercise efforts for effective communication. Mark served as Senior Emergency Management Communication Analyst at Argonne National Laboratory prior to moving to Summit ET. Holly is the Strategic Communications Program Manager, also at Summit IT. She manages, develops, and delivers strategic communications training, exercise support, and technical assistance. Holly also manages strategic communications research analysis. Prior to joining Summit ET, Holly served as the Emergency Management Communications Analyst at ANL. If you have any questions, we will have time to take those in the Q&A after this presentation. So please feel free to enter those in and we will talk and discuss those then. Please join me in welcoming Holly and Mark to the virtual stage.
Hello, and welcome to this session, Bridging the Gap in Risk Communication. We're so happy you joined us. My name is Mark Bassnight. I'm one of your presenters and facilitators.
And I'm Holly Harden.
We're so happy that you joined us today. We want you to engage with us using the chat pod. So right now, why don't you let us know where you're viewing from, all over the country and maybe over the world. I don't know, but wherever you're from, wherever you're watching us from, let us know in the chat. And I think communicating risk is so important. It's so relevant. It's so timely to what's going on today, considering the most recent and current and future state of affairs. We have a global pandemic. We have civil unrest, a volatile political climate, and not to mention the Weather Channel, NOAA, and Colorado State University are forecasting that this hurricane season could be one of the most active on record. And how about this? According to the National Interagency Fire Center report, given the dry fuels, any lightning will result in an increased fire activity and above normal and a significant large fire potential into September, right? That's where we are, right? Across much of the Great Basin, Northern California, the Pacific Northwest, and the Northern Rockies. Talk about risk, right? So let's get into this. What are we going to talk about during our short time together? We're going to describe risk communication concepts. We're going to discuss the value of risk communication concepts and message development, and as it pertains to communication strategies. And then finally, we're going to identify and reintroduce some best practices in rad nuke messaging. So let's jump right in. Holly?
So let's talk a little bit about what exactly risk communication is. So there are lots of definitions out there in risk communication, but we really like the one from the World Health Organization, the one listed on your screen here. And it truly appreciates that people are not just receptors of information. They're not going to simply receive the information you give them and do as you ask. Would you all agree with that? Let me know in the chat pod. So, while we know that messages are truly an important part of risk communication, we really have to recognize that communication is truly a two-way process. We have to understand that people will make their own decisions. Our job as communicators is to help them make informed decisions with the best, most reliable information possible. So, while knowledge of risk and protective actions are critical, that information, just having that information, is still insufficient to really affect behavior. There's a huge body of research that shows us we need to consider what people know, what people believe, and what they see other people do. So, through this presentation, we're going to talk about our approach, which is to consider what people know, believe, and see, and understand that those beliefs and visual cues will affect their behavior as much as or more than just having the information or knowledge. And risk communication is so incredibly important because it's used for a number of reasons. It's used as a call to action for people. It's used to educate and inform. It's used to affect behavior and attitudes. It can even be used to manage an agency's reputation. So let's talk a little further why effective risk communication is so essential. So, why is it important? Well, as Mark highlighted, we're dealing with an unprecedented forecast of extreme weather disasters across the country here. So, we really need to be cognizant of the fact that we're seeing an increasing frequency, intensity, and duration of weather events. That's not to mention the unknowns. We all work in a world with very unique hazards. All of our sites have very important missions related to national security, energy production, you name it. And so we need to make sure that we understand that while these are threatening our communities potentially, we have to understand at what level we're working with here. There's also an increased global travel. We've seen how that's really impacted us with the current pandemic. And just to highlight it a little bit more, take a look at that graph in front of you with a map there. It highlights that during 2019, just last year, the United States experienced a very active year of weather and climate disasters. In total, we were impacted by 14 separate $billion disasters, including 3 major inland floods, 8 severe storms, 2 tropical cyclones, and 1 wildfire event. Uh, 2019 also marks the 5th consecutive year that we had 10 or more separate $billion disaster events impacting our country. And it's also wrapped up too in this incredibly amazing, challenging volume of information that we are presented on a daily, minute by minute, second by second basis out there. In fact, we are now working through our first infodemic. Has anybody heard of this before? Let me know in that chat pod there if you've heard of this terminology before. The World Health Organization actually characterized this term here, and it's really characterized by just the volume of information we have on social media, largely characterized by misinformation and disinformation. It's really fueled xenophobic content, amplified fears. It's even sparked physical discrimination in some instances. And while there's lots of challenges with social media, there are some good that we do need to highlight too. There's opportunities. For instance, social platforms allow us to actively engage with our intended audiences. We can also be very actively monitoring the misinformation and disinformation and correcting it quickly. We can make sure we're getting verified reports from boots on the ground. It also can be used to track future disease outbreaks. Believe it or not, social media is used in a lot of cases for that. It's also become a collective space for providing comfort to those affected through sharing personal stories, even in some instances, mourning loved ones that may have lost through disasters or even through the current pandemic we're experiencing. So to highlight that a little bit more, let's address digital around the world. And this is according to Digital Trends 2020 publication. This really highlights our need to be connected. And I think it really illustrates just how information we're accessing on a daily or minute by minute basis even. And now we're even accessing that information anywhere, any place via our mobile devices. If you look at that, it's pretty staggering to think that there are around 8 billion people across the world here, and about 67% of them use mobile phones. It's pretty staggering there. In fact, another sort of interesting statistic, more people globally own a smartphone than they own a toothbrush. So this really highlights our need to be connected and also underscores the amount of information that's just flowing out there at any given time, and then amplified by our current status right now, managing through a pandemic, civil unrest, and now we're moving into a very active hurricane and wildfire season, as Mark pointed out. but we also need to address what people need to know. Mark, let us in a little bit about what people need to know during these times of crisis or unknown.
Yeah, so it's really important. I think the question to ask is this, right, Holly? Does perception actually equal risk? Is it actual risk? What they perceived is that actual risk? And so when we ask this question, we want to, what do people really want to know? And it's going to lead into another question, like, right, what do they need to know to take action, right? Because that's, are they doing what we're asking them to do? Are we reaching? Are we hitting the mark with our communication goals? So what do people want to know? What happened? You see a fire truck, you hear an explosion, you see the police car go down the street. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? What happened, right? And then you're saying, like, the next thing is, what does it mean to me? Like, how is this going to affect me? Is this going to interrupt life as I know it for this moment, right? And then the next thing is, what are you doing about it? Who's coming to save the day? I want to know who's going to fix this, right? That's really what we're asking. And really what's important, what are the risks? Am I in danger? What actions do I need to take? And really important that we consider the tone and that we're communicating this, especially off camera. If we're using text and we're using video and we're using photos and those things, there's such a thing as the virtual tone, right? We really need to pay attention to that. So, Holly, I want to throw it back to you. What is it that people really want and need to know when confronted with an actual risk and an imminent crisis in order to get them to take action? What is that?
You got it, Mark. Absolutely. And it's important to note, too, that all of this is in the context of providing people that air. We have to alert, inform, and reassure our audiences. At the same time, we have to be addressing what they know, believe, and see. As we mentioned in the discussion about risk communication, when we talked about the definition of that, we need to understand, too, that there are physical and visual cues to motivating action. The intention to protect oneself really depends upon how we appraise or assess a threat. And it's based on a couple things. It's based on the perceived severity of a threat, such as a wildfire. It's also based on our sense to be able to cope or to deal with that potential threat. And it boils down to two things: response efficacy and self efficacy. So, response efficacy is an individual's expectation that carrying out a recommendation can remove that threat. So, thinking back to the fire example there, I can go out and buy fire retardant roofing materials to protect my home from a wildfire. But then also, we need to have self efficacy, which is the belief in one's ability to execute the recommended course of action successfully. It's really the I can do it mentality. And if I do that, it will make a difference. So, for example, the belief that we can create a defensible zone around our home by removing bushes, and that we can install better roofing materials to help protect our homes from wildfires. And the belief that that will make a difference is what we're talking about there, that response efficacy and self efficacy. And it really comes down to some fundamental concepts of risk communication as identified through some recent research. So we have to be able to make sure that our intended audiences feel like they are capable of taking an action to prepare and respond. We need to make sure that they understand that taking action to prepare and respond will make a difference. We need to make sure that they can take an action to control the danger, that they believe they're solution oriented. They need to believe that fear will not make them deny the threat or avoid taking action. They also need to see others taking action. People that they know need to be talking about it. We need to socialize those preparedness behaviors. We also need to confirm that the decision we're making is the right decision, and we have to have had received that information about the event or incident from many trusted sources as well. We have to think about too that risk perception that Mark mentioned. Risk perception literature really asks, why do some people get concerned about some things but not others? So let's do an example here. So why are some people concerned about nuclear power plants but they're not concerned about smoking? Well, if we understand what causes stress for individuals, it really gives us the opportunity to address that stress. So we have to think about what causes stress for individuals, and research really indicates that facts about risk play very little role in determining public perceptions or concerns about the risk. Radiation and nuclear are great examples, right? Would you all agree? Let me know in the chat. A lot of people's perception about radiation or nuclear incidents are attributed to video games or popular culture. So we have to think about what are those perceptions, how are they shaped, and how can we affect behavior change based on those existing perceptions. And it really comes down to trust, fairness, and control. That's what people put more basis on when making decisions when it comes to perception based information. So we have to make sure that we're communicating in a trustworthy manner, that we appear as fair, and that we appear as we are in control of the situation. But also, we have to think about some of our communication goals too. Mark, talk a little bit about why those primary communication goals are so important and what those are.
Yeah, we really need to have some strong communication goals and then some objectives centered around that of how we're going to hit that target, right? So what are your primary communication goals? Are you communicating to alert, to inform, to reassure, to educate? Are you trying to express empathy or sympathy because of injuries or um, death? Destruction? Are you trying to influence people or motivate them to take a particular action? Why? You really need to identify, and this is really important when we're talking about risk. You have some strong communication goals and then the objectives to reach those goals. So, what is the strategy, right?
Absolutely. So, with any, we have to have our goals. So, we have to understand what our intended outcomes are. Then, we have to have a strategy to get there. So, we have to look at the different risk communication strategies based on research. And we talked a little bit about those. And typically, when we do these sessions, Mark and I will break you into groups and we'll have you have some discussion based exercises around this. So, in lieu of that, we've got a handout for you that you can download. We'll share with you. We're happy to email it to you as well if you don't have access to it via any of the EMI SIG apps. But we really have to look at these different risk communication strategies and discuss how we could use these to help be more communicative with our intended audiences to help them make those informed decisions about their life, health, and safety. And it does come down to also creating messages that motivate action. So we have to think about what action do we want our audiences to take? What attitudes might affect their willingness to act? And what should our messages lead our audiences to know, believe, and see? And some of these strategies might be able to help you. But also, our key messages are incredibly important. Mark, talk a little bit about developing key messages.
Well, I think it's important to note, first of all, a lot of these messages, when we're talking about key messages, they can be pre-canned, they can be pre-developed, right? Pre-approved. So we're ready, we're locked and loaded, ready to go in the event of an incident or an emergency involving radiation or nuclear. Think about it like this. Keep things really short. Keep them simple, short sentences. Use words that people, your audience uses every day. I was getting ready to say that we use every day, but depending on who you talk to every day, that may be too much to give to our intended audiences. And it's really important if you're going to be on camera to practice out loud. Let me ask you the question. Answer in the chat here. Have you ever said something in your head and it came out of your mouth completely different? I know I have. Let us know in the chat if that's ever happened to you. So here's the formula. K over I plus S squared equals keep it simple and short. right? Speak in sound bites so your intended audience can digest and consume your messages. It's really important that we keep things succinct and simple because of the emotional and the psychological impact. People have a diminished capacity to comprehend during these convoluted and complex incidents. Holly?
Absolutely. And there's a great tool for that. There's a tool for that. A lot of you might be familiar with message maps. Some of you may not. So, for those that aren't, this is an excellent tool that should definitely be in your emergency public information report. A message map is essentially a tool every communicator should have. It's a science based discipline based on the rule of three, which states that during high risk, high concern incidents, we have a diminished ability to process information. So it keeps it short, succinct. It's great for developing sound bites, like Mark said. It helps us to really create informed and appropriate beliefs, decisions, and behaviors for our intended audiences. And ultimately, it helps us avoid communication regret, which is definitely the key out there. So, in conclusion, this was really quick. We understand that, and we're so excited to be able to participate in Q&A for you. A few key takeaways here. Mark, would you mind addressing the first one there?
Absolutely. The current events, we started off talking about a global pandemic, civil unrest, a volatile political climate. We're in the midst of a very active and what could be one of the most active hurricane seasons on record. And then we have the wildland fire threat. So current events highlight the importance of reassessing risk communication and what strategies are we going to use? What are our communication goals? We have to stay current if we're going to be effective. And we want to move people from risk to taking action.
Absolutely. And risk communication should really consider what people know, believe, and see. We have to understand that beliefs and visual cues will really affect behavior as much as or more than knowledge. And please feel free to use that handout, the communication strategies, to help really inform your messages and your strategy out there.
And then finally, risk communication is strategic. You've heard us use that term before. It's more than just public information. We really have to be strategic in how we communicate. Why? Because the same things mean different things to different people. So we're so glad you joined us for this session, this short time. We know this time went by so quick. We wish we had more time with you, but we are going to spend just a few more moments with you in a live Q&A. And if we run out of time, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on our social media, LinkedIn and Twitter. So again, thanks so much for joining you. We're looking forward to Q&A in just a moment.
Thanks so much, Mark and Holly. I appreciate that. So yes, as Mark said, on your mark, get set, let's ask questions. The first one I would like to talk about is, I loved your quote on perception and perspective may be one's truth. However, comma, their perception and perspective may not be true. That I live with a teenager now, so we have these conversations on just because you say something doesn't mean it's true. How is this impacting what you see this is impacting?
Well, I think everyone would agree we live in a different world, right, Holly? It's everything has changed, and now with the proliferation of the information that's available and that's being communicated, um, people can get information anywhere. Holly described last week or just a couple of weeks our first. Not only are we experiencing our first pandemic, but we're experiencing our first infodemic. Holly, you want to touch on that real quick?
Absolutely. Yeah, the director of the World Health Organization actually coined that term, and it's just based on the volume of information that we have thrown at us, in addition to the fact that we're really living in this misinformation and disinformation ecosystem in which anybody with an internet connection can be the expert on anything. Anybody can start up their own blog and say that they're the expert health physicist in everything nuclear, or they're the expert epidemiologist in everything COVID. So we're working against this. So that's why we have to be really on our game now and take into account, how do we inform people with the best information possible so they can make the best decisions? And sometimes it takes hard words. Mark, recently, just with Hurricane Laura, what was it that one of the local mayors or he or she said that if you don't plan on evacuating, put your social security number in a plastic bag and tape it to your body. I mean, so sometimes hard words have to come into play here.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. We're out of time. I apologize. Go ahead and complete the survey by clicking on the survey icon beneath this window. And for those of you doing the scavenger hunt, now it's time to update your form. Our next session will be improving Hanford EOC responder proficiency. Select it from the schedule on the left or join another channel to watch a demonstration, a workshop, or participate in a user group. Thanks so much, Mark and Holly. I appreciate it. We'll see you later.